Hello, welcome back. Amber here. This is Atlas Elsewhere, and this is my series where I'm walking us and talking you through The Hedge Knight by George R. Martin. Last week we started with the series, and I'll be continuing on with this for as many segments as it takes and as many videos as it takes for me to finish this novella. Now, before we go in, just a reminder, I'm taking this slow, okay? We're not going to be speeding through this, so strap in, get cozy, do all that stuff. Another thing here is I'm not going to be doing any spoilers. I'm not going to be making big connections between the Hedge Knight and what happens in the greater A Song of Ice and Fire series. What I would like to do is look specifically just at this text and take the words in for what they are and not make connections and not make any spoilers and just kind of interpret what's given. And I'm going to be kind of looking at this as though it were my first read through. So, with that, last week we ended where Dunk had thrown a copper to this young stable boy and kind of left this in. And now, as we continue, Dunk is actually reaching the tournament grounds at Ashford, and he's beginning to take in these sights, right? We've got the pavilions that have kind of sprung up all over the grounds, and he's taking in the streamers and the heraldry and the pageantry of it all in a kind of poetic way. It's colorful and it's very descriptive of what he's seeing. And as he's looking out upon, all the colors and the heraldry and the sigils on these pavilions and tents that have sprung up, he thinks back to Sir Arlen of Pennytree and he says, the old man had ridden with some of these knights. Others Dunk knew from tales told in common rooms and round campfires. Though he had never learned the magic of reading or writing, the old man had been relentless when it came to teaching him of heraldry, often drilling him as they rode. And so the first thing that sticks out to me here is kind of this word that's really giving us a descriptor of Dunk's childhood and his time spent with Sir Arlen. Because when he's talking about Sir Arlen never teaching him the magic of reading, I think the word magic can say a lot in terms of how Dunk sees himself. It's not that just learning how to read and write is a hard thing to do, but he chooses the word magic as though it's something outside of his control, something outside of his caste, outside of his class system, and where he sees himself belonging in the social order of this landscape. And it also tells us a little bit about Sir Arlen because it's probably most likely that Sir Arlen couldn't teach him how to read because he couldn't read himself. And so, as much affection and as much he holds like Sir Arlen in a high regard, it does kind of plant the idea that Sir Arlen wasn't as worldly as maybe he could have been. And so it's very humbling when you look at these two characters and their travels and what they've experienced together. And so as we continue, he's looking at the tents and he's saying, the nightingales belong to Lord Corin, and the crowned stag was from Sir Lionel Baratheon, the laughing storm. He sees House Tarley, House Dondarrion, the Fossaways, the Lion of Gold on Crimson is Lannister, the Estermonts. And then he sees the red stallion that could only belong to Sir Otho Bracken. And his mind goes to this tale that he knows about Sir Otho Bracken, who was called the Brute of Bracken, slaying Lord Quentin Blackwood. 3 years passed during a tourney at King's Landing, and Dunk had heard that Sir Otho struck so hard with a blunted long axe that he staved the visor of Lord Blackwood's helm and his face beneath it. And so I really like this segment here because we're getting, all of the names and the houses, right? And George R. Martin does a really great job of kind of doing these little inserted history lessons within the text. And this is just one of them where we're learning who belongs to what sigil and, the apple of Fossaway and the lion of Lannister. But this specific story about Sir Otho Bracken and Quentin Blackwood is also preparing us for what's to come in terms of tournament and how tourneys go, because as much pageantry and colorful. And, this is such an experience for Dunk and a lot of the people who are taking part in the tournament. It's also very dangerous. And so, as he's thinking about this story to himself, we have to assume that he's really preparing himself for what's to come. If he's going to enlist in this tourney, then he needs to be prepared for the violence that could happen and most likely will happen. As we continue, we see some more banners: the Blackwoods, the Cargyles, the Westerlings, Swan, Mullendore, Hightower, Florent, Frey, Pentrose, Stokeworth. You get the idea. And after all of this, taking in the sights, he's looking around at these pavilions and he's realizing there's no place on the tournament grounds for him to put up a pavilion or something like that. And he's thinking a threadbare wool cloak would be all that he had to shelter himself tonight. And his supper, and while the knights and the lords are dining in the halls on suckling pigs, he's going to be sleeping out somewhere else by himself, eating hard, stringy salt beef. And so again, like, it's very humbling, but he also thinks to himself, a hedge knight must hold tight to his pride. Without it, he was no more than a sellsword. And he's thinking, I must earn my place in that company. If I fight well, some lord may take me into his household. I will ride in noble company then, and eat fresh meat every night in a castle hall, and raise my own pavilion at tourneys. But first, I must do well. And reluctantly, he turns his back on the tourney grounds and leads his horses towards some trees. And again, we get a lot about how he sees himself, how he perceives himself. An earlier text where it's kind of like humbling. He doesn't know how to read or write. But what he's describing here is how he sees the world and how he sees competence and how he believes that for him to succeed in this world, he has to be competent and he has to take matters into his own hands and prove himself to these other lords. But it also kind of explains that he also firmly believes in this, I guess, value that if you do a good job, you will be rewarded for it. And that's kind of the story of being a knight, right? If you do well, if you do what you should, if you do what you're supposed to do, then the world will recognize you for those values that you see in yourself. And as we go into the story, that's the greater question about knighthood, right? So if you stick to your values, if you stick to your oaths and you do a good job, then the world will see you as this just knight. And that's the question here. If he does do a good job, if he does hold his values above all else and he proves his worth, then will he become the knight that he wants to be seen as? Or is this world a little bit less optimistic than Dunk sees it? Is he about to get his dreams shattered here because the world doesn't hold tight to that same value system? So Dunk walks out about a good half mile from the town and the castle, and this is where he finds a bend and a brook and a deep pool of water. There's reeds growing and spring grass, and he's thinking to himself, this spring grass here was as green as any knight's banner and soft to the touch. It was a pretty spot, and no one had yet laid claim to it. And he thinks to himself, this will be my pavilion, a pavilion roofed with leaves greener even than the banners of Tyrells and Estermonts. And so here, again, we're kind of seeing this hopefulness from Dunk, where he's literally talking about how green the grass is, almost like the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, where he's approaching this with pure optimism, where he kind of felt bad, like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to raise a tent with these noble lords, but over here the grass is green too. And you have to ask yourself, is this optimism worthy and honorable, or is it also naive? And so we have to kind of hold that in our heads as we continue. So he takes care of the horses, and after they have been tended to, he decides to strip down and wade into the pool of water to wash away the dust of travel. And he says to himself, A true knight is cleanly as well as godly, the old man always said, insisting that they wash themselves head to heel every time the moon turned, whether they smelled sour or not. Now that he was a knight, Dunk vowed he would do the same. And so I want to kind of take a close look at this line, now that he was a knight, because so far in this novella, we have not heard anything alluding to Dunk's knighthood. We haven't heard anything about Sir Arlen knighting him. And so if this has happened, it happened in the past before Sir Arlen died, obviously. So we're going to have to put a question mark there and come back to it later. Now, as we continue, Dunk's drying off under this elm tree and he's just enjoying the warmth and the spring air on his skin. And as he's standing there, he watches a dragonfly kind of slowly move around the reeds. And once again, in typical George R.R. fashion, we get one of these in world history lessons where him seeing this dragonfly makes his mind think of dragons. And he thinks to himself, why would they name it a dragonfly? It looks nothing like a dragon. As we go on, we learn Dunk had never seen a dragon. The old man, though, Sir Arlen, had. Dunk had heard the story half 100 times, how Sir Arlen had just been a little boy when his grandfather had taken him to King's Landing, and how they had seen the last dragon there the year before it died. She had been a green female, small and stunted, her wings withered. None of her eggs had ever hatched. Some say King Aegon poisoned her, the old man would tell. The third Aegon, that would be, not King Darren's father, but the one they named Dragonbane, or Aegon the Unlucky. He was afraid of dragons, for he had seen his uncle's beast devour his own mother. The summers have been shorter since the last dragon died, and the winters longer and crueler. Okay, so we're thinking about Aegon here, Aegon the Unlucky, and his fear of dragons, and him witnessing his own mother be devoured by his uncle's dragon. Now, this is obviously a connection that we can make with this little story here to some other characters in the greater A Song of Ice and Fire universe. And the story that he is telling is actually very relevant to Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon. And without spoilers, just know like these are events that we're probably going to be seeing on TV at some point soon if they go that far into it. So let's continue here. After contemplating all of this history, he's saying to himself he did not need to study his reflection in the water to know that he did not look much a knight. So he slung Sir Arlen's shield across his back to display the sigil. Hobbling the horses, Dunk left them to crop on the thick green grass beneath the elm as he set out on foot for the tourney grounds. So, with this very small little segment here, we're getting a glimpse into Dunk being very unsure. He's looking at his reflection in the water and he's thinking, man, I don't look like the knights that are here for the tournament. And he's not there with a lot of bravado and pageantry and color, and he doesn't have his nice supplies, and he doesn't have the things he needs that's going to put him in the same class of knighthood with, these royal families and important people. So what he does is really important here. He looks to Sir Arlen's shield and slings it over his shoulder, which I think is a really good moment to kind of contemplate the importance of a sigil and how much that means to a knight. And Dunk doesn't have a sigil. He's not noble. He's a nobody essentially. But Sir Arlen did have a sigil. And we've kind of got this moment where he's looking to Sir Arlen, even though he's not there anymore, and using his shield to kind of booster his own morale and kind of give him that little bump of confidence that he needs as he's approaching what's going to be this first tourney for himself and this journey that he's finally doing alone on his own 2 feet with no mentor. And so he's really holding Sir Arlen with him as he's doing this. Then we move on and we get another very colorful descriptor of the Ashford town and how as he's approaching, he's noticing that this second town had sprung up overnight, a town of silk instead of stone, larger and fairer than its elder sister. And I really love this description. I think there's something really beautiful about how he's describing this little bustling new town that's kind of been built up overnight as all of these people have traveled from outside Lord Ashford's domain to come here for this tournament. And I think it really describes really nicely just how much of a big deal this is. And for him to say that now there's a second town inside of Ashford that is made of silk instead of stone, it's really pointing to just how I kind of feel like it's a sign of how naive Dunk is, but how he's such an optimist because he's not quite sure in himself, but he's really like pushing himself forward. But he's really taking it in the sight. And it's almost like if you're a little kid, right, and you've never seen a mountain before, and you see like the first big mountain in your entire life, it kind of like puts this moment of awe inside of you where you're like, wow, like I've never seen something like this. So we're kind of getting an idea of what Dunk sees as like beautiful or valuable or just what he's enjoying about this scene. And it's not the town itself. It's not that it's a big city. It's not so much that it's full of people. And it's not so much that it's a big town or a rich town or something like that. It's the pageantry, it's the silk tents, it's the experience. And for him, this is just, it's something that he's very poetically describing. And I feel like you would only describe that so poetically if it was something that was bringing you awe or joy. And as we're talking about awe and joy, he's kind of describing just how busy and bustling it is. Thousands or dozens of merchants, jugglers, puppeteers, and he also is thinking to himself, well, there's also cut purses and thieves. And so he's kind of holding his coins closer as he's thinking about this. So he eventually smells some sausages sizzling over smoky fire and he's like, okay, I'm hungry. So he buys one with a few coppers and washes it down with some ale. And as he ate, he watched a painted wooden knight battle a painted wooden dragon. The puppeteer who worked the dragon was good to watch too. A tall drink of water with olive skin and black hair of Dorn. She was slim as a lance, with no breasts to speak of, but Dunk liked her face and the way her fingers made the dragon snap and slither at the end of its strings. He would have tossed the girl a copper if he had one to spare, but just now he needed every coin. And so now we're kind of getting a look into the romantic side of Dunk, I would say, where he's kind of got his eye on this young puppeteer woman. And now, again, in typical George R. R. Martin fashion, we're getting this description of this Dornish puppeteer woman. And she's slim and has beautiful skin. And Dunk is really admiring the way that she's like doing her craft and how she's making the dragon puppets move. And he wants to toss her a coin, but he's like, ah, I don't have enough money for myself even. And so we kind of put a pin in that, but he's got his eye on her and he sees her. And then we kind of get into some business here. As Dunk's kind of making his way through the crowd, he's noticing that there were armorers amongst the merchants, and this is exactly what he was hoping for. And so he sees a Tyroshi man with a forked blue beard selling ornate helms, gorgeous, fantastical things wrought with shapes of birds and beasts, chased with gold and silver. But then he thinks to himself the man he needed was all the way down at the end of the row. A shirt of fine chainmail and a pair of lobstered steel gauntlets displayed on a table before him. Dunk inspected them closely. You do good work, he said. And so again, just making a pause here because I really love this about Dunk because as much as he is just kind of wowed by the pageantry of all of these knights and their sigils and their heraldry, he also is passing by one of these merchants who is selling these really ornate and fantastical helms with, bird shapes and beasts. And he's making his way past that so that he can go to the simple, I guess, less ornate, just well-made chainmail and gauntlets. And that's the utilitarianism of Dunk that I really love. He's not a flashy guy. He does appreciate good work and good steel and well-made things, but he's not going to bother with these really whimsical and fancy creations. He passes right by it. So he's telling this armorer, "You do good work." And the stumpy man says, "None better." And Dunk's thinking the smith was no more than 5 feet tall, yet wide as Dunk about the chest and arms. He had a black beard, huge hands, and no trace of humility. And honestly, I kind of feel like that's what you want to see, like someone who knows they do a good job, not someone who's like timid. Like you want somebody that's like, yeah, I made that. I'm proud of that. You're not going to find anything better. And, it speaks a lot to this Smith's character when he says he has no trace of humility. And Dunk saying, "I need armor for the tourney, a suit of good mail with gorgets, greaves, and a great helm." And he's thinking to himself, the old man's half helm would fit his head, but he wanted more protection for his face than the nasal bar alone could provide. And I love this sentence right here because we had just heard this story from Dunk about Sir Otto Bracken, the Brute of Bracken, who slayed Lord Quentin Blackwood by hitting him in the visor, and the long axe going through this man's visor, killing him. And so, what does Dunk do? Immediately after thinking of that story, he makes his way into the city and he decides that he needs something for more facial protection for this tournament. And again, it just goes to show how well Sir Arlen of Pennytree had prepared Dunk for a moment like this. He knows what he needs and he's not going to leave anything to chance. And despite him wanting to do well in this tournament, he realizes that there are things that he needs to take very seriously in terms of injury. And it also points us in the direction of knowing, like, hey, these tournaments are very dangerous. They are violent things. And so it's not just going to be beautiful pageantry and colors, it's going to be potentially deadly and very violent. So we go back to the armorer who's looking Dunk up and down, and he's saying, "You're a big one, but I've armored bigger." And he comes out from the table and he's doing all of these measurements on Dunk. And he's saying, "I have some pieces in me wagon that might do for you. Nothing prettied up with gold or silver, mind you, just good steel, strong and plain. I make helms that look like helms, not winged pigs and queer foreign fruits. But mine will serve you better if you take a lance in the face." And Dunk says, "That's all I want. How much?" So again, like we're going back to that very utilitarian nature of Dunk and how he perceives himself. He knows what he wants, and it's not all of this, prettied up, fanciful armor. So Dunk asks how much it is, and the armor says 800 stags for I'm feeling kindly. And this gives Dunk pause. He's thinking 800 was quite a bit more than he expected. And so he's doing some quick math and decides I could trade you some old armor made for a smaller man and a half helm, a mail hauberk. And so the armorer says Steely Pate sells his own work, but if it might be, I could make use of the metal. If it's not too rusted, I'll take it and armor you for 600. So now Dunk's got a price, 600, but he also has to kind of trade some of Sir Arlen's things. And Dunk's thinking he could beseech Steely Pate this armor to give him the armor on trust, but he knew whatever sort of answer that request would likely get. He had traveled with the old man long enough and learned that merchants were notoriously mistrustful of hedge knights, some of whom were little better than robbers. So Dunk's applying all that he knows, right? And he's saying, I'll give you 2 silvers now and the armor and the rest of the coin on the morrow. And so He'll pay a little bit today and then come back for the rest. And Steely Pate, this armor, studies him for a moment and he's like, okay, 2 silvers buys you a day. After that, I'm going to sell it to the next man. So we've got a deal that has been struck. And I think this says a lot between Dunk and Steely Pate, right? Because Dunk needs to go prepare things. He needs to get his money in order. He needs to get everything together to come bring back to Steely Pate. And also, we're getting the idea that Steely Pate, for now, trusts Dunk on this kind of like small deposit that he's been given. And so, will they have trust for one another or will it go sour? We will have to wait and see. Then we go ahead and we jump forward a little bit to later that evening at camp. And Dunk is describing the moon was well up by the time he had stepped back towards his elm tree. He's looking back at Ashford Meadow, which is ablaze with torchlight, and the sound of songs and laughter drifted across the grass. But he's not in this celebratory mood like everyone else. He's thinking about how he's going to raise this coin to pay for his armor and what would happen if he's defeated. And he's telling himself, one victory is all I need. That's not so much to hope for. And then his mind kind of drifts back to Sir Arlen. And he says, even so, the old man would never have hoped for it. Sir Arlen had not ridden a tilt since the day he had been unhorsed by the Prince of Dragonstone in a tourney at Storm's End, many years before. It is not every man who can boast that he broke 7 lances against the finest knight in the 7 kingdoms, Sir Arlen would say. I could never hope to do better, so why should I try? Dunk had suspected that Sir Arlen's age had more to do with it than the Prince of Dragonstone did, but he dared never say as much. And then he thinks to himself, the old man had his pride, even at his last. I am quick and strong. He always said so. What was true for him need not be true for me, he told himself stubbornly. Okay, and so with this little segment here, we're learning a bit about Sir Arlen's past and his, I guess, success or lack of success in other tourneys and his joust that he had with the Prince of Dragonstone. And this is another thing that I like about these little moments thinking back on Sir Arlen of Pennytree, because he's saying, hey, why I could never hope to do better. Like I had a great joust even though I lost. Like he's kind of sitting with that and letting it sit and kind of speak of his pride. Like he's not boastful and saying, I should have won, I could have won, but like I did my best, I did a good job. Why should I hope for any more? And Dunk is kind of thinking about this segment and he's saying, but you know what? I'm strong and I'm quick and everyone said so, like Sir Arlen said so. So maybe what's true for Sir Arlen isn't true for what's me. Maybe I can make a name for myself. Maybe this is my chance. And what we're constantly seeing with Dunk is him kind of teeter-tottering on the confidence of his youth and then balanced with like that a little bit of like shy naivety of being kind of a humble no-name knight, and where there might be a little undercurrent of shame under that, but he's always coming back around and kind of speaking highly of himself. And so you get the idea that he's a really well balanced personality where he's confident in himself, but he's not boastful, maybe unless he's drinking a little bit. And so, yeah, like he's got a good mix of qualities here. And I'd say like he's pretty even kiltered for such a young man, but it's always interesting seeing him be so confident in himself, but also kind of like come back down to earth at times and think about things clearly and carefully. And so throughout this story, we'll have to kind of keep an eye out on where his where his confidence is currently sitting, because a lot of times it's kind of up and down. And this is, I think, a big part of Dunk. Now, after this, he's kind of moving through a patch of weeds and just thinking about his chances in the tourney. And then he sees a flicker of light through the bushes and he's thinking, what is this? So he doesn't stop. He just grabs a sword and just starts crashing through the grass and kind of parts the grass and like jumps out of it. And he's roaring and cursing, only to the jerk of a sudden halt at the sight of the boy beside the campfire. And he says, "You." And this is again, of course, our young stable boy from we were talking about last week. And so Dunk lowers his sword and he says, "What are you doing here?" And this little bald boy is like, "I'm cooking a fish. Do you want some?" And Dunk's like, "No, I mean, how did you get here? Did you steal a horse?" And the little boy is like, "No, no, I rode back in a cart with a man who was bringing some lambs to the castle for my Lord of Ashford's table." And Dunk saying, "Well, you best be gone or find another cart. I won't have you here." And the boy is like, "Hey, you can't make me go. I've had enough of that inn." And Dunk's like, "Okay, like I'll have no more insolence of you. I should throw you over my horse and ride you now and ride right now to take you home." And this little boy says something that really catches Dunk off guard. He says, "If you want to take me home, then you'd have to ride all the way to King's Landing. You'd miss the tournament." And Dunk is like, "What? King's Landing?" And for a minute, Dunk thinks that this little boy is mocking him, but the boy had no way of knowing that Dunk had also been born in King's Landing. And as Dunk is thinking about this, he thinks to himself, another wretch from Flea Bottom? Who could blame this kid for wanting out of that place? And he's starting to feel a little bit foolish here, standing with a sword in his hand over this little 8-year-old orphan. So he sheathed his sword and he just starts kind of mean mugging this little boy. But he doesn't want to, like, he doesn't want any talk back or anything like that. And he's thinking, I ought to give him a good beating at least. So once again, we're going back to like, yeah, Dunk is for the most part pretty nice to this kid, but he's always kind of like resorting to the threat of violence. So he looks around camp and the fires are burning and the horses had been brushed and his clothes were hanging from an elm tree drying above the flames. And this young stable boy has taken care of Dunk's little campsite. He's taking care of the horses, he's cooking food. And he's like, what are those doing there when he's talking about the clothes? And the little boy says, "I washed them and I groomed the horses and I made the fire and I caught this fish. I would have raised you a pavilion, but I couldn't find one." But then Dunk kind of gets a little questioning with this kid and he's like, "Hey, what happened to your hair?" And this little boy is explaining that the maesters had shaved it all off. And as he's saying this, he gets a little self conscious and the boy pulls up the hood of his cloak. And Dunk's thinking, like this poor kid, this poor orphan, he probably had lice or rootworms, and the maesters had to shave his hair. And so you can see him kind of like soften a little bit. This little kid has kind of like wormed his way into Dunk's heart and he's asking, "What's your name?" The little boy is asking Dunk, "What's your name?" And Dunk says, "Dunk." And the little boy just starts laughing like it's the funniest thing he had ever heard. He says, "Dunk, Sir Dunk, that's no name fit for a knight. Is it short for Duncan?" And then we move into this segment of the story, which is pretty heartbreaking because as Dunk is questioned about what his name is, this little kid is like, "Is it short for Duncan, Sir Dunk? Like, what kind of name is that?" And Dunk honestly doesn't know. He can't remember if Dunk was short for Duncan. And then he's thinking, "Duncan, yes, Sir Duncan of dot dot dot." So Dunk doesn't know what to call himself. He doesn't have a sigil, he doesn't have a name, he doesn't have a pavilion. Who is he? Dunk had no other name nor any house. Sir Arlen had found him living wild in the stews and alleys of Flea Bottom. He had never known his father or mother. What was he to say? Sir Duncan of Flea Bottom did not sound very knightly. He could take Pennytree, but what if they asked him where it was? Dunk had never been to Pennytree, nor had the old man talked much about it. He frowned for a moment and blurted out, "Sir Duncan the Tall." He was tall, no one could dispute that, and it sounded puissant. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here in this paragraph. We have the shame of Dunk not really knowing his story, his full name, and not remembering his mother or father. He had a really hard life in Flea Bottom, saying Sir Arland of Pennytree found him living wild, so like just feral on the streets. And he was found living in the stews and alleyways of Flea Bottom. Now, a stew is like a more gentle term that kind of refers to a bathhouse or a brothel. And he's out here living on the streets and alleyways and in the brothels, which is not a very great upbringing. And what is he gonna tell this kid? To call him Sir Duncan of Flea Bottom? And no, he can't say that. That's shameful. It doesn't sound knightly enough. And so he decides that he can't also take Sir Arlen's name of Pennytree because he knows nothing about Pennytree. And I love how this thought occurs to him after an earlier segment where he was feeling a little bit ashamed and started carrying Sir Arlen's shield as kind of like a boost. And so now we're getting this harsh reality, right? He can't forever live under the shadow of Sir Arlen or Sir Arlen's name or Sir Arlen's sigil. He has to come up with something on his own 2 feet, and he does, and it's calling himself Sir Duncan the Tall. And afterwards, he's kind of proud of himself and he kind of likes this idea. And he's thinking, it sounds kind of influential, like Sir Duncan the Tall. And so we get such a whole range of emotions from this little paragraph here. It's sad. We get to know about his upbringing, his hard life, and then his connection to Sir Arlen. And then that kind of pushes us forward into his own independence and his new path forward under his own name and under maybe even he'll find his own sigil. Then we move into the moment where Dunk decides to ask this little boy for his name, and the boy doesn't hesitate and just says egg. And Dunk doesn't laugh here, and he's thinking, well, his head does look like an egg, and small boys can be cruel and grown men as well. And so he doesn't want to shame this little kid by laughing at him. And he just says, egg, I should beat you bloody and send you on your way. But truth is, I have no pavilion and I have no squire either. If you'll swear to do as you're told, I'll let you serve me for the tourney. After that, well, we'll see. If I decide you're worth your keep, you'll have clothes on your back and food in your belly. But he's saying, and I promise not to beat you except for when you deserve it. And so, once again, as we had saw in an earlier segment of this reading, Dunk is really set on his values, where if you do a good job, you'll get recognition and things will be easier for you. And he's applying it to this young boy. He's brushed out the horses, he caught a fish, he's cleaned Dunk's clothes, and he's thinking, you know what? Yeah, like he did show his worth here. And so I will take you on, but just for the tourney. After that, I can't make any promises. And this little boy who calls himself Egg smiles and says, yes, my lord. But Dunk has to correct him here because he's not a lord. So Dunk says to call him sir and corrects him and says, I'm only a hedge knight. He wondered if the old man was looking down on him. I will teach him the arts of battle, the same as you taught me, sir. He seems a likely lad. Might be one day he'll make a knight. And this is such a sweet, kind of like tender thought of him, I guess, carrying out the wisdom that Sir Arlen had given him in the training. And he's thinking, yeah, like now I can do the same. And he wants, in retrospect, Sir Arlen to, I guess he wishes Sir Arlen could probably be there and see like who he is and how he's doing. And he's taking this moment of bringing this young boy under his wing as a way to kind of honor his mentor, Sir Arlen of Pennytree. And as we continue, they eat the fish, even though it was a little raw on the inside, and the boy had not very completely removed all of the bones, but it still tasted better than the salt beef that he had with him. And Egg soon falls asleep beside him at the fire, and Dunk lays on his back nearby, his big hands behind his head, gazing up at the night sky. He could hear the distant music from the tourney grounds half a mile away. The stars were everywhere, thousands and thousands of them. One fell as he was watching, a bright green streak that flashed across the black and then was gone. And Dunk thinks to himself, a falling star brings luck to him who sees it. But the rest of them are all in their pavilions by now, staring up at silk instead of the sky. So the luck is mine alone. And we have to take into account just the poeticness of Dunk's nature and him seeing this falling star is a sign. But we have to remember George R. Martin is very sneaky when it comes to prophecy and signs. And when Dunk's interpreting this falling star as a good sign of good things to come, we need to question whether or not that's going to be the case. Will something good happen? Would something bad happen? And can we really trust what these little moments of foreshadowing are kind of giving us here? And I think overall, this segment is really doing a lot of character work about Sir Dunk, his relationship with Sir Arlen, and how that's going to carry over onto this little boy named Egg, who he has just brought into his service as a young squire. We get to know more about Dunk's upbringing or lack of upbringing in King's Landing, but we're also getting a little bit to know about this young boy who's very observant and who seems to know a lot about knights. And he's very inquisitive and asking Dunk a lot of questions, but he's also very competent. And, he can cook, he can clean, he's really willing to show himself and prove himself. And I think that's the values that Dunk sees in him that makes him like him, because Dunk carries that same value system for himself. If you do a good job, you'll get recognition. And this little boy just kind of wormed his way into Dunk's heart by following that same core set of values. And now we've got a connection between the two of them. So, with that, I want to kind of just stop it there, and we will come back for the next segment, and I'll probably put that out next week. But please, if you enjoy these read throughs and you're liking this, please like. And also, this is a new channel for me. I have another channel where I do other stuff, but this one's kind of like stuck in the 120 subscriber area. So if you do like this video, please help me out and hit the like button, subscribe, do all those things. I will be back with the next part next week, and I will see you then.